Hello all and welcome to this hands-on lab. In our lab today, we will see how to create, initialize and activate an AWS CloudHSM cluster. Couple of things to keep in mind before we proceed further ahead. Using AWS services leveraged in this lab might incur charges. Hence, ensure that you clean up all resources after completing this lab. Scenario for our lab today. Your team is planning to leverage AWS CloudHSM cluster to create an AWS KMS custom key store for your project. You, being one of the team members, have been tasked to provision, initialize, and activate an AWS CloudHSM cluster for your team so that they can go ahead and create a custom key store. Right? So your primary task is to get this cluster up and running such that your team can leverage it in the future to create a custom key store. Prerequisites is, of course, knowledge of KMS, is knowledge of CloudHSM, and what is a custom key store. So if you already know this, just move further ahead. If you don't know any of these services, please feel free to refer to these videos, or you can even read up the AWS documentation. Reference URLs. So we have 3 reference URLs over here. The first 2 URLs has most of the commands that we will be leveraging today. So in case you want to copy those commands, just go to these URLs. I will have them posted in the description of this video. The last URL basically talks about the prerequisites or what is needed in order to ensure that you can create a custom key store, right, from a CloudHSM perspective. So once our cluster is up and running, we will basically review through all the prereqs in this article to ensure that our cluster meets the requirements. So let us begin with this hands-on lab. The first thing that we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and provision our cluster using AWS console, right? So this is our first step. I will be provisioning this cluster in my default VPC across 2 subnets. But if you have your own VPC, feel free to do that. Ensure that it is at least across 2 subnets and availability zones. Okay, so let me switch real quick before I jump in. This is the first URL that talks about initializing the cluster, and this is the second one that talks about activating the cluster. I mean, refer to these URLs whenever you get some time, right? These are the 2 reference URLs that I mentioned earlier. Okay, this is my AWS console. This is CloudHSM, and let's go ahead and create our cluster. Right, so let me go over here and click on Create Cluster. I'm going to select my default VPC, and I am going to select 2 subnets right over here. So I'm going to select US East 1A and US East 1B. Okay, and then cluster sources, create a new cluster. Next, ensure that you change this backup retention to 7. That is the minimum number of days. And after this lab is over, while you're deleting your cluster, right, ensure that you also delete the backup. Next, if you want to give any tags, review, right, and create cluster. So this cluster creation takes about, on a good day, 10 minutes or so. But on bad days or when the service is really slow sometimes, it can potentially take about 15 to 20 to 25 minutes as well. So be patient, right? As you see, it's in progress. It takes a little while, and we will come back to this cluster shortly. Okay, so we have basically completed this step. Next is to initialize our cluster. The first thing that we are going to do is we will basically go ahead and create an AWS HSM. So the cluster that we've just provisioned, we have to wait for that cluster to come up, right? And then we will go ahead and initialize our cluster. So we will select the initialize option from our menu, right? And then select one of the availability zones to provision our first hardware security module in this cluster. Once the HSM module has been provisioned, we will have to wait for it to be activated, right? Okay, so let's see if this cluster is up and running. Does not look like it is. Okay, so it's going to take some time. I'm going to pause this video and come back in a little bit. So our cluster has been created, as you see, right? It's right there. And this is the cluster ID. And currently is in an uninitialized state. Okay, so let us continue further ahead. We were just reviewing the steps for initialization right here. So we will go ahead and initialize our cluster. So we'll select our cluster, right? Go to actions, select initialize, and we will have to select the first AZ where we want to create our first HSM. So this is going to be in US East 1. This is a subnet that I'm leveraging, and click on create. And our first HSM is currently being created. So we have completed these two steps, and once it's provisioned, it will be active. Okay, so let's see what we have here. I have to go down. The create is still in progress. Okay, so this should take a couple of minutes. We will wait for this to finish. And in the meantime, right, we will go ahead and create an IAM user named HSM user with permissions to initialize the cluster. You can leverage CloudHSM's full access existing policy for this particular lab. Of course, in real life, you can create your own custom policy, but right now I'm just going with the full access policy. Okay, and ensure that after you create this user, you copy his username, password, access key ID, and secret access key. Okay, so let us go ahead and do that while the HSM is being provisioned. Go to IAM. Right, and over here, we will create a new user. So users, add user, and I'm going to say HSM user, right? Programmatic access, console access, custom password, whatever password you want to give. So I'm going to say HSM user, right? 23, I don't know, something like that. That's good. And I don't want the user to reset the password. So ensure that you copy your username. Okay. If you're like me, if you forget what your usernames and passwords are during the lab. So there you go. And I don't want this user to reset its password. So uncheck this. It's a custom password. Next, attach existing policies. And we are going to look for Cloud HSM. I'm going to give full access, right? Because remember, this user needs to have the right to initialize this cluster. Next. We'll review everything and create. Okay, so copy the access key ID. Copy that, paste it right there. And the secret access key, sure. Copy that and paste it right there. Okay, so now let's go back to our Cloud HSM and see if our HSM has been provisioned. This is our cluster and it's still in progress. Okay, we will wait for it to come up. Okay, so let's continue further ahead. So we've completed these steps. We are still awaiting our HSM to be active, right? So let's continue further ahead though. Okay, so what we need to do in the next step is we need to download the certificate for our cluster. Now, if you have OpenSSL on your machine, right, then use that. Let's say if you don't have or you don't want to download anything on your machine, right? In that case, for this lab at least, leverage an EC2 Linux instance. And this could be a T2 micro instance, from your free tier. So let us go ahead and now provision this instance, right? It's going to be a T2 micro Linux EC2 instance in your default VPC with public IP enabled and port 22 enabled. And once our instance is up, we will SSH into our instance. Okay, so let's go back. I don't think this is up yet. No, it is not. Okay, go to EC2. And here we will provision our Linux EC2 instance. So launch instance. Go to free tier. This is Linux 2 AMI, so that's good. T2 micro. We will enable public IP. It should be in your default VPC, okay? And storage is fine, tags are fine. Security group. Now, if you have an existing security group, use that. Otherwise, provision a new security group. The only port that you need open is 22 at this time. I have an existing security group that is EC2HG. This particular security group has both 22 and 80. Now, 80 is not needed. All that you need at this time is 22. But I'm just going to go ahead and reuse my EC2 security group. Review and launch. Launch. And launch instances. For instance, should be up and running in a little bit. Right, so this is our, we'll give it a name. Say CloudHSM EC2. CloudHSM EC2. Okay, it didn't like. For whatever reason, it didn't like it, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and copy its public IP address. And we will now go ahead and basically go to our key pairs over here. Only if I can find my key pairs. Okay, so this is my key pair. Change the font, and we will SSH into this. So it's up and running, EC2-user. Okay, so we have completed these two steps. The next thing that we need to do is we need to configure our HSM user on our EC2 instance to be able to use AWS CLI. So let us go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say AWS configure access key ID. Right, so this is my access key ID. I'm going to copy that, paste it right there. Secret access key. This is my secret access key. My region is US East 1. So I'm going to put that, and default format is fine. Okay, so user is configured successfully. So we have completed this step now. The next thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and download our cluster's CSR certificate with this command that is mentioned here. Now this command is mentioned in the initialize URL that I had given. So if you want to go ahead and copy from there, I have copied it over here in my notepad. And I had also copied the cluster ID earlier, right there. So this is the cluster ID. Let us go back and check if our cluster HSM has been provisioned or not. So this is our cluster, and it looks like our HSM is active. Awesome. Okay, so this is our cluster ID. Ensure that if you've not copied your cluster ID, copy your cluster ID. I've copied it right there. This is the command to describe the clusters, okay, and download that cluster certificate file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this cluster ID with my cluster ID, right? So this is the cluster ID, right there. Okay, let me copy it again and paste it right here. Okay, I'm going to copy this particular command and go back here. If you want to clear, you can clear and paste it right there. Enter. It looks like it's now stable. Recommend use, I think. Okay, let's see. Did we have anything missing over here? No, I think we are good. Right, let me just copy it once again. And paste this right here. Okay, it looks like it does not like my cluster ID at all. Okay, let's see, I think I have a space. So if you make these mistakes like how I'm making, right, just go back and revisit. There you go. Revisit that command. The problem was that there was a space over here between the equal to sign and plus after there was no space after the cluster ID. Anyway, so we have basically downloaded this certificate successfully. If you do ls minus L, you will see that the cluster certificate is right here. Okay, so we basically completed this step. The next thing that we will need to do is we will need to sign a certificate. And for that, we will need to provision a private key. So this is the command to provision that private key. So let us copy that particular command. So I have it right here. I'm going to copy this command, and this is going to provision that private key. So private key has been provisioned. As you see, it is generating the private key, and it is asking me to enter a passphrase. I'm going to keep my passphrase same as my user name. So HSM user. Keep it simple, guys, okay? HSM user. Okay, and I'm going to copy that passphrase right there over here in Notepad as well, so that I don't forget it right there. Okay, so our passphrase has been generated, our key has been generated, right? So you see this is our customer CA key. This is our private key. So we completed this step. Now we will use this particular private key to create a self-signed certificate, right? So remember that we downloaded the certificate, we will have to sign it. Okay, so let us go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that particular command right here, right? And paste it right there. We'll have to enter the passphrase and country name. I'm going to give US. I don't know, city, I don't know, some city. Organization is name. Organization unit doesn't matter. I don't want to give a common name. Email address is fine. Okay, so we basically created this, and I'm going to go ahead and do ls minus L, and you will see that this particular certificate has been created. So this is our cluster certificate. This is our key. This is the certificate that we just created. And the next step that we need to do is we need to sign our cluster CS, as I mentioned earlier, right? Leveraging this particular certificate and key right there. Okay, so let me go ahead and copy this particular command. And before I do that, I will need to copy the cluster ID and replace it right there. So paste it right here, right? So this is our cluster certificate, right? The first one. The second one is the certificate that we just created. Then is our key. And finally is the signed certificate that we want to create. Okay, so go ahead and copy this particular command. Come back here, clear, paste it, or enter the passphrase. Okay, it has succeeded. So let us now go ahead and look at the files. So this is our cluster certificate that we downloaded. This is the signed certificate. This is, of course, the certificate that we created to sign, and this is our key. Okay, so we have successfully signed our cluster CSR leveraging this particular command. Now we need to go ahead and initialize our cluster, and we will do that leveraging this particular command. If our command is successful, then the status will change to initialized on completion. Okay, so let's go back over here, copy this command, right? And again, I have to replace the cluster ID. So I'm going to copy my cluster ID and paste it right here. Again, similarly, remember we created the signed certificate. Put the cluster ID right there and copy this command, clear, and paste it right here. Okay, so it looks like our command was successful and our cluster is initializing. And as I mentioned earlier, the state will change to initialize upon completion. So the initialization is currently in progress. If we actually go back and go to clusters, you will see that the status has changed. It's currently showing that initialize is in progress. Just refresh this. It does take some time for this particular cluster to get initialized. Okay. And let us come back. So we have successfully completed these steps. Of course, the initialization is in progress, but our cluster will be successfully initialized, right? So we've provisioned our cluster, we have initialized our cluster. The next thing that we need to do is we need to activate our cluster. And in order to do that, we will have to perform some steps. The first thing that we will need to do is we will need to download and install AWS CloudHSM client on our EC2 instance. And these are the commands for that. It should actually be client. I missed that word over there. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that particular command. Okay, so this is the command. You will see that it will download. So I'm going to clear this. Paste it right there. Okay, it downloaded successfully. And after that, we're going to basically go ahead and install it. So let me go ahead and copy this particular command, right? And paste it right here. So it's installing. It's installed successfully. I'm going to clear my screen. And we have successfully completed these two steps. So now we have downloaded and we've installed the AWS HSM client. The next thing that we need to do is we need to edit the client configuration. So for that, we will need to switch to the root user. And you can do that by executing this particular command, sudo su, right? So I'm going to copy sudo su, go back. So now you see we are using the root user. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to copy a cluster certificate to this particular path. And the command to do that is right here, right? So I'm going to copy that copy command. So go here, copy the command, right? And this command will copy the certificate to that particular path. So it looks like it has copied. Okay, this is the original path, and we will now say cd, and I'm going to copy this particular directory, right? And now let us do ls-l, and our certificate should be copied over here. So as you see, it's right there, customer CA cert, right? It's got copied successfully. Okay, I'm going to clear this. So we completed these two commands. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to modify the configuration of AWS CloudHSM client to update our HSM's IP address. And this is the command to do that. But before we go and update the IP address, we have to get the IP address, right? So let's go back and hopefully this has initialized. Okay, it's initialized. There you go. The status has changed. That's good news. Click on your cluster, go to your HSM. This ENI IP address is the IP address that you want to copy, right? And then you want to come back here and paste it right there. Basically, just replace this IP address with your IP address. Copy it, go back and paste it right there. Hit enter. So it's updating the server configs. That is the client config and the management util file. So we have basically completed this step. Now the next thing that we will need to do is we will need to log into HSM, right? That's our cluster. And we have also provisioned one HSM in it using credentials of this pre-crypto officer, that is Preco. Now this is typically done for the first HSM, as I've mentioned over here, right? In a new cluster that contains a Preco user. It's nothing else but the admin user with the default username and password. And when you change the password, right, you will see that that admin user, which has the type Preco, will eventually then become the crypto officer. Okay, so let us go ahead and log in and see how we can do this. Okay, so in order for us to do that, we will have to first start the CloudHSM management utility. Okay, and we will do that using this particular command. So go back over here, copy this, right, and paste it right there over here. Okay, then copy it. See if it's copied now. Okay. Now let's see if it successfully connects to this port or not. Remember, it is communicating on this particular port. And when we provisioned our EC2 instance, right? Remember, the only port that we had opened up was 22. So this will actually fail. But I wanted to show this to you, right? So that if I make a mistake while I'm doing this, if you get an error, you know why you're getting an error. If I would have straight away gone ahead and done it, then probably you will not realize that, hey, it actually uses a special port. Anyways, in order to do that, we will need to modify the security group of our EC2 instance to ensure that this particular port range is open. We also need to ensure that a CloudHSM security group can also communicate on this particular port with our EC2 security group. So let us go ahead and change these two security groups. So let us go to EC2, and then go to security group. Okay, now before I do that, I did not capture my CloudHSM security group name. So in order for me to do that, I'll have to go back. And in fact, I can basically even click from there itself on the security group, right? So this is the security group for my CloudHSM cluster. So click from right here and it will go there. And you can select the security group and you will see that this particular port range is open. Now this is 223 to 225, which is fine. Okay, edit inbound rules. And this is the default security group, that is the current one, right? Now what we need to do is we need to ensure that our EC2 instance can communicate with CloudHSM. And for that, we will have to ensure that our EC2 SG is mentioned over here, right? Right there. So basically, if you want, you can actually make it 222 as well. Otherwise, 223 is also fine. This is the general range. Okay, so I've added our EC2 security group over here. See rules, right, for our inbound communication. And the same thing is going to be true for our outbound communication as well. I'm going to say EC2 and then save rules. Okay, so both our inbound and outbound rules have been changed to ensure that CloudHSM can communicate with our EC2 instance, right? And remember that EC2 is actually using this port 2225. And as you see, the connection has failed. Now let us go back to our EC2 groups and look for our EC2 SG right there. Okay, so inbound rules. Remember, we only had port 22 and 80 in my case. Otherwise, in your case, it will only be port 22. Edit inbound rules. And here, we are going to add a new rule. It's going to be custom TCP. Now, again, I'm going to say 222. You can also have a 223, but ensure that it covers this range, right? And here, we will have to select our CloudHSM's security group. So it's right there, right? And save rules. For outbound rules, I think the communication is open. Yes, it is. Okay, so we have made our required changes, right? Remember, it's communicating on port 2225. So now let's go back. Hopefully these changes have been implemented. And if our changes are successful, this connection should also be successful. So let us try and execute this command all over again. There you go. Our changes were successful. And now our EC2 instance is communicating with our CloudHSM over port 2225, 2225. Okay, now you see over here, you at the bottom right there, you see AWS-CloudHSM, right where the cursor is there in green. So you basically completed these steps. And now we will be able to log in to our HSM. And the command to do that is right there. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that particular command and paste it right here. Okay, so it's saying login is successful, as you see right there. And now, of course, the reason why we logged in was to change the password. But before we change the password, remember what I had mentioned earlier, that when you log in for the first time, the default user, right, has the type pre-co. And after you change the password, it changes to CO. So it's right now it's a pre-crypto officer, then it will become decrypto officer. Okay, so let us verify that. And for that, we will run this command called as list users. Hit enter. And there you see, this is the admin user and the type is preco. Right, so it's currently in a preco state. Now that's what we want to change. We want to change this preco to co. So we logged in, we enlisted all the users. It is type preco, and now we will change the password. Okay, so scroll down. Now you'll have to give a new password, and I'm going to use new password as new password. Okay, so I'm going to substitute whatever password you have. I'm going to copy new password as my password. So this is my password. Okay, copy this, go back, paste it right there. Remember, your new password is actually new password. Okay, hit enter. You want to continue changing the password? Yes. Password was changed successfully. Let us verify if the password was changed successfully. We will similarly do list users again. So hit enter. And if you see username admin, the type is now changed to crypto officer. So a password change was successful, right? So basically, you changed the password successfully. Remember the password, okay? In my case, just to keep things simple, the new password for me is actually new password together. That's my new password that I'm highlighting. Okay, and if this was truly successful, this of course changed to CO, but most importantly, our cluster should activate. So let us go back and check if this thing activated. There you go. You see, status is active. So we are in business. That is good. So we've completed all of these steps successfully. So now our cluster is active. Maybe we are ready to hand it over to our team who wants to create a custom key store, or maybe not. Let us see. Now our cluster is ready, but is it really ready for AWS KMS to create a custom key store? Let us review the prerequisites. This is the URL. This was a third reference URL as well, right? And I'm basically going to go ahead and copy that, right? So this is the URL. Open this URL. I'll have this posted in the description as well, right? I'm just going to paste it right there. Now it mentions over here that the AWS CloudHSM cluster that you select must have the following characteristics to be able to be leveraged as, you know, for by AWS KMS to create a custom key store. It should be active. So it is active. It should be in the same account and region, which it is. It cannot be associated with any other custom key store in the account. It is not. It's a brand new cluster. Okay. And most importantly, it should have two private subnets and two different availability zones. I think when we provisioned the cluster, we did that, right? Remember I told you, select two different subnets and two different availability zones. So I think we are covered over there. The cluster security group should have these ports open. Good. You're good over there. So all of these we are good with. The last one, the cluster must contain at least two active HSMs in two different availability zones. Let us go back and check. This is a cluster. It has two AZs, two subnets. It's active, right? Of course, we know it's brand new. Nobody's using it. But it has only one HSM. That means this particular cluster cannot be leveraged to create a custom key store. In order for us to be able to do that, we have to create another HSM in a different subnet and a different availability zone. So click on Create HSM, select a different AZ and a subnet, click on Create, and now it is provisioning another HSM right now. It will take some time for it to provision this HSM, but you see that it is going to be in a different AZ and a different subnet. So it's coming up. This is the IP address, right? And the creation is still in progress. It takes a little while for this particular HSM to come up. So in order for your team to be able to create the custom key store, you need to have two HSMs at two different availability zones. We did do that. So hence we went ahead and provisioned another HSM in a different availability zone. Once the HSM is up and running and active, then all your steps from an HSM perspective will be over. Of course, if there are any changes that are required, your team will let you know. But at this point of time, you are in good shape. You can now pretty much hand this cluster over to your team and tell them that if anything else is needed, they will let you know. Or otherwise, they can go ahead and make any changes that are needed as well. So guys, I hope that this particular lab was helpful. This is pretty important. That's why I went a little slow as well. I hope that you guys understood what I was trying to accomplish over here and how typically a cloud HSM cluster is provisioned, right? And how we provision HSMs within the cluster. As I said, please ensure that you delete all resources, right? And also ensure that you delete backups. As you see, it's creating backups for me. So ensure that you delete and clean up all resources. That's your cluster, HSMs, your EC2 instance, your user, and your backups. Ensure that all of that is cleaned up. Okay, guys, that's it from me today. And I will see you shortly in some other video. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.